the last room. The elevator climbed 42 floors in silence, a pressurized ascent into the stratosphere of global finance. Arthur Vance adjusted his cufflinks, his reflection in the polished steel a mask of controlled ambition. Beyond the doors of Valence Capital lay the final gatekeepers. This wasn't just an interview, it was a dissection. He stepped into the boardroom, where the Manhattan skyline stretched out like a blueprint for conquest. At the head of the mahogany table sat Eleanor Thorne, the chairwoman whose reputation for dismantling unprepared executives was legendary. Beside her sat Julian Vane, a man who looked for weakness in the gaps between sentences. Eleanor didn't offer a smile. She offered a challenge. The air in the room was heavy, with the scent of expensive espresso and the silent weight of billion-dollar decisions. "Mr. Vance," Eleanor began, her voice a sharp blade. "Valence is prepared to commit $400 million to our new liquidity protocols. However, the volatility in these decentralized markets is a quagmire. If the capital is locked in a liquidity trap during a flash crash, the loss is total. How do you justify the risk?" The question hung in the air, a physical weight pressing against Arthur's chest. Arthur felt the familiar pull of the mental translation loop. His brain fought to process the complex algorithmic data, calculate the risk of slippage, and find the words simultaneously. In the high-stakes theater of the C-suite, a 2-second delay is an eternity. He knew he had to bridge the gap between technical complexity and board-level intuition without stumbling over his own thoughts. Julian Vane leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "Don't give us the view from 30,000 feet, Arthur. We've heard the platitudes. I want to know why you won't get stuck in the operational mud of protocol governance and smart contract failures. Are you just another tactical technician, or do you actually understand how to move the needle in a hostile digital environment?" Arthur noticed his right hand twitching toward his water glass. He stopped it instantly. He could not afford any physical leakage. No fidgeting, no breaking of eye contact, no signs of the adrenaline surging through his veins. He took a slow breath, centering himself. He wasn't there to defend a spreadsheet. He was there to lead a revolution in how Valence moved its capital. "The risk isn't in the protocol, Julian. It's in the reaction," Arthur said, his voice steady. He deliberately avoided drowning them in granular jargon about gas fees or shard chains. Instead, he maintained a perfect strategic composure, pivoting the conversation from the minutiae of code to the broader vision of market dominance. He spoke of the $400 million not as a cost, but as a lever. "Our success depends on proactive stakeholder alignment between our quant teams and the protocol developers," Arthur continued, addressing the room with renewed energy. "We don't wait for the market to move. We shape the environment through deep-tier liquidity and strategic partnerships. We turn the volatility into a barrier to entry for our competitors." The tension in the room reached its peak. Arthur delivered his closing argument with zero-latency communication, answering Julian's follow-up questions about yield farming and risk hedging with a precision that left no room for doubt. There was no lag, no hesitation. He was no longer a candidate being questioned. He was a leader providing a roadmap for the firm's future. Silence returned to the boardroom, but it was different now. It was the silence of consensus. Eleanor Thorne stood up and extended her hand across the mahogany. Arthur had projected the executive presence required to steer Valence Capital through the storm. He hadn't just answered the question, he had claimed the seat. "Welcome to Valence, Arthur," Eleanor said, her voice finally carrying a hint of respect. As they shook hands, Julian nodded in silent approval. The $400 million was no longer a risk, it was a mission. Arthur looked out the window at the city below, knowing that the real work of deploying the capital was only just beginning. He walked back to the elevator, the weight of the new role settling on his shoulders. He was no longer the man who had walked in an hour ago. He had mastered the room, navigated the friction, and emerged as the architect of the firm's digital future. The doors closed, and the descent began, but Arthur Vance was only going up.